Hey, what's up, you guys? This is Peter Hahn again. We're back at Monsterpalooza on the third day, Sunday for the last day. And we're going to continue with the watercolor piece. We didn't get to finish it fully on the second day, but you know what? We got a last day to kind of go in there and really wrap things up. So the line work was all finished up last time we had chatted. And we're going to go in and start to kind of do some wet wash, just like we had done prior. And we'll see how it goes in terms of just building up some of the saturations and details using the watercolor itself. I left a lot of areas opened up as much as I could, so that way we can use more of the paint to help associate to the details and such things. So let's play with that. Obviously, the watercolor set I'm using is the Holbein watercolor set. And we're gonna go by more cool washes initially, and we'll kind of build it up as we go along. But I'm gonna start with the background first, and I'll go into the character then afterwards. So right now, just mixing in some of the cools. I would say it's more of a slight phthalo blue, some cerulean blues. Don't worry so much about the color that you're using. Just general blue is fine. So right now what I want to do is just get a bit of the background. So I'm going to go more warm on him and cool in the background. I'll probably push the character to be just slightly darker because of all the line work, and push that background to be a little bit lighter, if anything else. So now we're just going straight in. So using a flat brush, I'm able to cover a lot more ground.
Do you know what type of, like, basically, how do I, if I were to clean it, how would I, is this what I need?
Your question?
Don't worry.
Oh, it's okay. That's all right, man. This is an open show. I'm talking to people here.
I'm just curious.
Getting a question about some of the
What
work
type
over
of
here.
ink is this? Like, can I wash it, or how does
So it's using a water-resistant ink, a pen that I'm using right now.
Okay.
And I used, actually, on that one, marker. This one was watercolor. I've top coated this one with a spray, with a fixative. So
okay.
I wouldn't wet wash it. What I would do is scrub and brush if you
Okay.
want to clean anything, from
Yeah.
that. If you wear it,
Okay.
So I would prefer people wearing it if they buy it.
That's-
So yeah, because that's why I make it for it. But again, if you want to display it too, that's okay.
Right.
But this kind of stuff, if you do happen to get some dirt and stuff on that,
Yeah.
this is an alcohol-based marker, so it's not going to wash off.
Okay.
So you could also spray, it's like a sneaker, like a cleaner.
Sneaker,
Yeah,
okay.
a spray
Yeah.
cleaner basically, and just kind of scrub it lightly,
Okay.
and then you'll be fine.
Cool, man. Thank
Yeah.
you. How often do you make a shoe like this?
Well, I do a lot of personal stuff for myself,
Right.
and I'll take commissions once in a while.
Oh, okay.
So when I do shows like that, I'll bring one just for the show.
I see.
But I don't do a lot of work for other people
Gotcha.
because I'm just a collector myself,
I gotcha.
But hey, for this particular show, I figured out why not.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, but if you have any other questions, just let me know about the sneakers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Going into the wash now, so at this point, it'll pick up a little bit of ink here and there. And, we're going to keep washing away at this. You'll see that it picks up a little bit of ink here and there because I'm using two types of pens. One is the Pigma Sensei, and the other one's the Pigma FB models. So one of the inks, the Sensei ones, sit on top of that with a little bit more, I would say, saturation with the density of ink. So as I'm putting water on this, it'll pick it up lightly, but you'll notice it doesn't really blend too much. But it does have a little bit of drippage here and there, but so far not too bad. A lot of these areas that are already kind of dry right now, again, I'm kind of scrubbing it to dry, but with the watercolor, I can go back in there and rework the edges, and it softens it up. So I just apply a bit more water on top. Yeah, so the question was like, what happens as the paint is dripping? And natural accidents like that, I welcome, and I certainly love having it as a part of it because it adds things like a bit of a textural element to it, but also just the visual effect is really fun. So I'll even do things like splatter effects and whatnot, color shifts and dripping of water. Sometimes I'll do it more kind of like by choice. Other times it's also by accident, but the happy accident is really, really cool. No, it doesn't ruin the color as ink is being picked up into it. It'll be a little bit of a value shift slightly, but because of the watercolor as it dries light. So I can layer more paint on top of that and build it up as I go. So I can also then move around the ink and make it more of a part of the actual overall piece. Especially out in this particular area, I'm not really so cautious about the way things are super sharp or precise or perfect. I'm going to concentrate that control more in here, and all the other areas can be really kind of softer and fuzzier or blended and textured, which gives it a little bit more concentration to the focus.
Honestly, I think that's what I'm most afraid of with water paint.
Yeah.
Because it drips everywhere.
Yeah.
I feel like it ruined the whole painting.
No, it doesn't ruin it.
It can be done.
It's part of the experience of producing it. Now, of course, if you're trying to fully, avoid that situation, then what I would do is set this on a flat surface, and so that the paint won't move. A lot of these areas in the clouds, those will be a bit more warm, possibly, maybe a mixes of purples. We'll fill it to the edge. Just kind of working it in. I'm not super delicate with it in the very beginning. The idea is like it's all big general strokes, broad movements. And the looser you are with this and tighten things up, it retains some of the energetic feel of the drawing that's there. Because keep in mind the fact that this is still more of a drawing than it is a painting. Painting, of course, is an adjustment to light and shadows and values, where this is more of a line of construction, shape, that kind of thing. The color definitely accentuates the overall feeling. It adds elements of depth to certain elements as well too, but it's not a full painting for sure. So we'll kind of work our way around this direction. Shifting things around. Some of these are a bit more of the blues, shifting it a bit more to the sea greens. Letting that ink run a little bit. I do like the way it kind of flows into each other a little bit more here. So almost done with the background, just to fill it in real quickly. We're going to come back and touch things up as we go along. Again, letting the ink move a little bit. I have a broader brush for something like this, but I've noticed with the brush that I have that's a little bit broader, it doesn't really pick up a lot of the pigment of the watercolor itself, so it has a lot more water in it, and as I'm washing on top, it ends up going really light. So I wanted to use a slightly smaller brush to kind of tighten things up with this area, with the color itself.
Does it affect much if you pick up the wrong brushes?
No, not necessarily. In the beginning, I think you can be very much more general about it. As you go along, of course, certain brushes will make certain effects. Flat brushes to round brushes for detailing or washing. So any areas that I don't like the bleeds, I'll kind of pick it back up, move it around a little bit here, shift it. Again, coming back with a bit more movement around brush strokes. But a lot of this stuff will kind of blend in. And as it dries out, again, a lot of it kind of fades to the background. It's a lot lighter. But these kind of natural textures and effects like this are really, really fun. And I don't want to get rid of them per se. I want to add more to it if I can. But this is the kind of stuff you can't actually physically control to do, because it's something that the watercolor itself has to naturally do itself. And this is the thing about watercolors that I would be the best advice that I would say, which is don't fight the medium. Just let it do what it's going to do, you know? Areas that will have a lot of ink coming into it, if I just add a bit more watercolor, blends it all together really well. So general coverage is there. What I'm going to do now is go back into the Monkey King and start to apply some color on him. So I'm trying to think about where I want to go, but I'm going to go more warm with him. Actually, there's a little spot right here that I want to fill with some of the blue. grab this spot right here.
Right here.
Trying to figure out where I want to go with him, but I'm going to go more warm tones. So I'm going to go with more of a darker face with the kind of the white fur. And with the white fur, I'm going to use kind of the tan to slight orange to kind of get some of that shifting of values inside. So let's play with that right now. At the moment on the palettes, I'm kind of using more of the cool on this end, but we're going to go back up to the top over here. So I just kind of mud things up a little bit like this. If I can use it, I'll use it. If not, I'll clean it up. But honestly, even just a kind of a brown, I'll start with, and I'll kind of shift it more to, you know, the grays, and I'll introduce some of the oranges to get that warm in there. But I want it to be shifted to be quite dark. So I'm going to mix the warm and cool together. So it'll start to work. Getting some of that additional paint. This is some of that burnt umber. Mixing it down to a kind of a dark blackish brown. All right, that'll be workable. All right, let's go in there. Right into the head. Using the flat brush. I don't want to use anything too tight and small as a brush because I get too specific and detailed. I still want to keep this kind of broad brush stroke. Now light is coming in from this direction, so I'm going to push some of the shadows on this side and have a kind of a rim light along his face. Going back into the head and the face, shifting it down to that nice dark color, creating that contrast, and the fur around the top of his head, around the body. Again, like I said, I'm going to go into more of a lighter fabric, or not fabric, I'm sorry, fur, but around the hands, maybe around some of the different parts. It's not going to be a lot of areas of contrast like this, because again, I want that fur to be the stark contrast and a bit of the yellowish and oranges and stuff. So let's clean that up a little bit. You'll see kind of what I'm talking about as I mix it. So I'm going to go.
Why you don't go like from the head to the body?
Yeah, so
From the head.
yeah, the question generally is about how come I don't move in a more linear approach towards the entire painting? How come I'm jumping around? As I select certain areas about where color goes, and if there's unified areas of things like skin tone or fur or fabric, as I mix the color for consistency, I'm gonna hit those spots and kind of go kind of like it's almost a paint by number in situation, but what a lot of times you can also do is do a wash of one specific color, let's say a warm or a cool, and you let it dry out, and then you go into those specific spots afterwards, and it kind of combines or unifies the entire thing together. But in this situation, I'm gonna go spot by spot by spot. For me, it's also because my mind tends to jump quite a bit, so I don't like to stay in one specific area because I overwork it too much. I'm gonna bring in some of that slight orange, go into the fur. The color is not gonna be that much different from the actual skin tone. I'll kind of wipe off the brush here and there, take off excess paint, but also in the fact that the actual pen is being lifted up and smudging a little bit, I use that to my advantage. I make it as if it's an actual value shift of shadow. So it combining with the watercolor pushes it slightly darker, so I don't need to use a lot of paint. In this situation, any sort of water mediums, less is more. So right here, this is gonna be all the fur. Notice a lot of that white of the canvas coming through. I don't touch that as much because we get a better sense of light direction coming in this way. A little bit on top of the head. You see that way that natural bleed of the blue comes in right there? Color shifts are really fun for me. I like that kind of stuff. I think when it comes to stuff like this in watercolor painting, I think the biggest concern, of course, is not knowing exactly what it's going to turn out like. And you can't fully predict exactly what the image is going to be. So all you can kind of do is rely upon your experiences, your skills, inspirations of such things. And that way you get a basic idea as to where this might end up going to. From there, it's about just kind of sticking with it. Maybe getting some second opinions, taking breaks in between. Don't try to finish it all at once. I would suggest you take a lot of breaks, step away from it, look at it from a distance. But yeah, new set of eyes, having people come in and take a look at your work. You see all that ink being picked up right there. But that kind of technique we will call ink wash. So the ink wash technique is to help kind of adjust some of the value settings naturally with the pen. Getting some pretty good washes right now. In these kind of open areas, I want to push that warmth even further. So I'm going to bring in a lot more saturation. And this will be that nice kind of like yellow, lemon yellow, sunset yellow, right at the edge of the form. And I'll push it to a nice kind of a, almost as if it's like a sunset setting with the way the light hits on him. But also these kind of color shifts are just really fun more for the image overall. Letting it bleed. And with watercolor again, making it very organic as a process, letting it do its thing. And then we'll blend. So far the line work and the ink is still holding up really well. Even if it picks up a little bit of ink, the actual stroke has already kind of like gone into the canvas. So there's a top layer of residue essentially of leftover ink that's picking it up. But underneath it, the line still holds up. So even if it does smudge a little bit, the line doesn't get lost. And pushing that nice warm. Wiping it and then going back in, cleaning off the excess ink, and just moving it around. Going into the fabric, there's local colors, which is the actual color of the material, but I also want to introduce the way the light is moving around it as well too. The fabric itself, I kind of want to go more for like the reds, so I'll kind of introduce kind of the yellow orange into the red as well too. And I already kind of used one set of watercolor for that red scarlet. By picking up that ink, it makes it shift it to a nice darker value, which is what I wanted. Now we're just moving it around, again, kind of grouping all these darker regions together. Back into this lower portion, it's kind of a side skirt of the material. And whatever picks up too much ink, just wipe it off, go back into the watercolor. Back into the lower portion down here. This piece of material is going to be more like a tiger fur fabric, so I'm going to go again kind of more of an orange, maybe a little bit lighter if I can, and bring in those black stripes. I will get questions of things like, will I go back and draw on top of this as well too? Potentially in some areas, maybe to tighten things up or to reintroduce in line work where it's got lost a little bit. So it's a possibility. Again, going back now into the armbands, some of the material and fabrics, shifting it around. Some of these jewelry pieces, I'll kind of change up colors. This is where I'll introduce variants, maybe some turquoise, blues, greens, yellows. And just because it's fun too. Maybe something like the emeralds. Again, back into maybe some of the oranges. Now you see this effect that I'm doing over here, which is kind of more of a dry brushing. So I'll use a bit less water if I can and bring it in. But for now, we're gonna keep it a bit more wet on wet. In a bit, we'll do a lot more dry brushing. So it kind of gives you a lot more color variance. Back up and top around the head guard. I think I'll go back into the scarf as well too. That one I'm going to shift it more to a cool. But definitely just a little bit more green if I can, so it offsets from the background of the blue. Grouping it together, using the ink, having a bit of texture. You know what's also really nice is that this canvas, being very textured, if I do dry brush with it, it does pick up that surface a little bit, so it gives you a lot more tooth. Visually, it's just a little bit more interesting.
Does canvas play a big role?
Does it play a big role?
Yeah, like do you have to decide what canvas you will use before you paint, or?
Not necessarily, well, to a degree sometimes. Certain canvases, can have different surface qualities, smoother or rougher. Some people will gesso it. Even there's different type of materials, things like linen or actual cotton. But typically, of course, things like canvases are mainly meant for oil paints. But for this watercolor, it's a little bit more unique. It's not a go-to for a lot of other people, but I find it very kind of appealing in kind of live situations. Let's go down to the side skirt. Get some of the ink picked up a little bit, use some dry brush. Maybe I actually will use more dry brushing on this one. So I'll start to let that water dry out a little bit, kind of almost scrub it on the surface, picking up on some of the texturing of the canvas itself, but not just like filling it in all, with water. A little bit touch of it. And I'm just kind of grazing the surface. And it kind of gives you more of a gradient feel, a little bit softer. But I can also now bring in some of that striping effect. Stripes from a tiger. go into the tail, all the way down over here. And kind of going onto one side, more into the shadow end, letting more of the light on the top kind of stay where it is. Shift it kind of more of the yellowish orange, doing some color shifts, maybe even introducing some like pinks and reds. Sometimes color is not necessarily just, you know, literal. It can also be based on just how it feels, where you want to go with it. And we'll keep working our way down. Some of the additional fabric, clothing.
White areas you're leaving around the lake, is that like the highlighted area?
A lot of these areas, yeah, where light would come in, yeah.
So you just think about it when you paint, you're like, I'm not going to paint those spots?
Yeah, a lot of times. You can also kind of partition those areas by literally drawing it in, but a lot of it is just kind of getting a general sense of where light's going to come from.
Mine is constantly thinking, oh, I can't paint here, the light's going to reflect.
What was that?
Mine's always constantly thinking.
Yeah, yeah. This is what makes it really complex because it seems relatively simple in about, you know, applying color or paint directly on the surface of it, but the amount of balancing of back and forth goes into like shifting or values or line or such things. It's 100 miles an hour sometimes, so it can be a bit overwhelming for some people at first. Yeah, intimidating also as well. But over time, it becomes extremely natural because, you know, you're so familiar with the way things are going to happen. You're able to predict where it's going to go. I'm going to wipe this down a little bit. Amber, could you hand me a paper towel? Okay, so let's go into maybe the material, the metal on the bar a little bit here, maybe some of the rock form, and then we'll start to do some more cleanup. I'll do some of the background of the clouds as well. I'm thinking more of a gold, to a slight copper look. And same thing, just letting the watercolor do its thing, letting the ink run a little bit here and there, having a light side. Let's go into the background cloud. I'm going to use a bit of purple for that one. Create just a little bit of contrast background, the clouds to the face on the edge right here. Doing some shifting of color here and there. Went back to play that purple again. but we're actually pretty close to getting a majority of the stuff painted in, and then it'll come down to some of the smaller nitty-gritty bits and pieces. And that's usually where actually time tends to be a bit more elongated, because you're being a bit more focused in specific parts. I find this to be the most enjoyable part, which is about being able to just move, apply things where I want to, shift things around, see how it feels. But getting to those specifics tends to be a lot more thinking, a lot more the balancing. For me personally. For others, I think they kind of enjoy the nitpicking and the specifics of control, but I kind of like more the generality of movement. What I always want to maintain when it comes to drawing or painting is some of the kind of the energy, the liveliness of some of the work. When it comes to like inking or painting, a lot of times if I render too much or over tighten, it flattens out the entire thing. I lose any sort of like life that goes into it. So with this, what I'm trying to do is make sure I let the material live the way it's supposed to live. I move in a more feeling and combination of technical means of together, and so that way it's cohesive as a piece. In my youth, everything was about control, perfection. Every line, every area was supposed to be exactly the way I wanted it to be. But eventually I found that there was no perfect. There is no such thing. It's just an illusion that you make up. So now it's more than just what it is as a visual. It's also what's behind that for me when I'm doing it. The experience of actually actively putting line or paint onto the surface. Then the subject matter of what kind of story I'm trying to tell. So whatever comes out at this point, I'm always going to be somewhat satisfied with what happens with this. Yeah, there's still things to learn. Yeah, I wish I could make this part better or that part better. And you can be very self-critical, but at the same time, I'm also going to be very satisfied. All right, let's go into the rock. So the rock, which is kind of going into more of the cool grays. All right, so going into the rocks now, moving it around. You know what? I'm going to bring in a bit of a bigger brush today. So we got a nice 1-inch flat. This will help me kind of cover more ground. Moving the strokes. And I'm using the paintbrush almost as if it's like a pen as well too, because I treat it as a brush strokes of line. So the direction, the hatching methods. Kind of cutting into more of a plano approach. So plane shifts as in like a top, side, front. Angling changes on the surface of the material. So a bit of that rock is now in there. Just making sure the silhouette relatively stands out. And as I said, I'm probably going to do some other kind of techniques here I'm going to try. What I wanted to try even real quickly to see if this will work is I'm going to use my paper towel and I'm going to dip it in water. Let it kind of saturate a little bit. And what I want to try here is to lift the paint off of the canvas. So in oil painting, what we will do is put a layer of oil paint, whether it's like a warm tone, cool tone, and we would draw in with the paint of a darker value of a portrait or something. And then we would use a scrubbing technique, a lifting technique. So we use the edge of the paper towel, and we can lift the paint right off of the surface. So the benefit of canvas is that it's not going to roll and peel like paper. It's going to be solid of a surface. So I can go in there and lift the paint with just a paper towel or a cloth, and I can then pull a lighter value if I need to. And so that if I want to push a darker silhouette around him, I don't have to feel concerned where the paint is going to be now, where the paint will be necessarily like flat or stuck. So right here again, just lifting it. So what it does, it kind of even creates a bit of a halo around him because of the effect. So now this is just watercolor being lifted right off. And to be honest with you, this isn't a technique that I would turn to often because I don't really do this for myself a lot. A lot of live shows, I do bring canvases in here, live painting and whatnot. But this kind of approach, even what I'm doing right now, is kind of on the fly. I just kind of had a thought of like, I used to do this with oil painting. I wonder if it would work with watercolor. Literally in this very moment, it's just me trying and experimenting. And it's working, working well enough in terms of what I had thought or expected. So that's pretty cool. So what I can also do now is take a bit of the brush with only just water and just move it around. Clean the brush up a little bit, move it. And this will help soften up more of the edges. I can bring in the paper towel again, lift it. So if I just wet the surface up, bring in some more paint, and kind of shift it in areas that I want. And that's the beauty of this canvas, is that I can keep working it, and I'm not concerned about it tearing or warping. So with watercolor paper, this would be impossible.
What idea are you having in mind when you look at
Yeah,
break clouds?
yeah.
Are you trying to create look at this clouds and sky and stuff?
To a degree, but also just like gradients where contrast of dark and light can help bring more focus in this area specifically. What I'll probably do is even just another wash of color around some of the areas, darken things up. Again, this is our first pass. This is just the first pass. So we still have a couple more things to do here, adjustment-wise, but we're gonna let this sit a little bit here and dry, and then we'll come back and start to kind of nitpick some things out. So, cool.